It's been a long time coming, but at last we have a proper successor to the legendary Dragon Quest VIII. That's right, Dragon Quest XI is a full-blown single-player Dragon Quest game that strives to return the series to its roots, viewed through a modern lens. With its fantastic sense of scale and classic gameplay, we've been absolutely delighted by the game thus far. DQ11 is a big release, not just for the series itself, but also when looking at future Square Enix role-playing games. You see, the game stands as one of the first in a line of big-budget Japanese role-playing games to make the jump to Epic's Unreal Engine 4. UE4 has become increasingly popular with Japanese developers this generation, and many were surprised when Square Enix announced that Kingdom Hearts 3 would make the switch to Epic's engine, while the remake of Final Fantasy VII is being built from the ground up using it. Aside from the small-scale Kingdom Hearts 0.2 Birth by Sleep, which used the engine with only moderate success, Dragon Quest XI is the first large-scale big-budget Unreal Engine 4 RPG to be released by the Japanese giant. So, the big question for us then is, how successfully has the development team utilized Epic's technology in building this game? And what are the drawbacks? Well, the first thing to note before we jump in here is that there are actually two versions of the game, a PlayStation 4 version, which we're looking at today, and a 3DS version. As you'd expect, only the PS4 version has been crafted using Unreal. The 3DS game was developed by a different team entirely and features its own unique design, including the option to play in either 2D or 3D. On PS4 then, the game was developed as a joint project between Yuji Horí's production company, Armor Project, and Orca, a studio headed by former Kaguya producer Takuya Iwasaki, who had previously worked on Drakengard and Nier. At first glance then, it's clear that DQ11 continues the visual style first introduced in Dragon Quest VIII. Black lines encircle each character, large colorful worlds stretch out into the horizon, and players are free to explore it as they see fit. Of course, DQ8 was released back on the PlayStation 2 first and designed for lower resolution standard definition displays. DQ11 on the other hand joins us in the modern HD area where expectations are higher than ever. So how does it stack up in terms of basic image quality then? Well, for those playing on a standard PlayStation 4, we're looking at 900p here with reasonably effective anti-aliasing in play. It's a little disappointing that we're not getting a full 1080p here, but it's par for the course with most high-end Unreal games, including Epic's own titles. Aside from the outstanding Gears of War 4 on Xbox One, most large-scale UE4 games still target resolutions below 1080p. For owners of a PlayStation 4 Pro, however, DQ11 enjoys a massive boost in image quality, but perhaps not quite to the degree we might have hoped. Basically, we're looking at a resolution of 3072 by 1728. The same resolution as NAC on the PlayStation 4 Pro, in fact. Exciting times indeed. To reach this resolution though, the game makes use of checkerboard rendering. This is then upscaled to 2160p where it joins the full resolution back buffer display in the UI. The user interface, by the way, is all rendered at a native 4K and looks very nice. Now, when you compare the game on PS4 and PS4 Pro, well, the benefits of the higher resolution become immediately evident with sharper lines, less aliasing, and a cleaner overall image. It's a very nice boost for Pro owners. It does, however, highlight one issue with the checkerboard implementation. If you look closely at the foliage as the camera moves here, you'll notice visible blurring. This holds true for the entire image when too much motion is present, in fact. Basically, the reconstruction technique used by DQ11 leaves a lot to be desired. Compared to other games like Horizon Zero Dawn, image quality is a step down, and none of this is present on the base PS4. While on the topic of checkerboarding then, I want to remind viewers that this technique can be used to reach any number of different resolutions. Some games use checkerboarding to reach a full 2160p pixel count, producing results close to a native 4K presentation. Assassin's Creed Origins on Xbox One X, for instance, uses checkerboarding to deliver a nice full 2160p image. The same goes for Horizon Zero Dawn on the PS4 Pro. DQ11, however, only reaches 1728p using checkerboarding while relying on traditional upscaling to close the gap between 1728 and 4K. Still, as mentioned earlier, the final output on the Pro is still a nice boost over the lower resolution on the base PS4. Aside from the resolution bump, however, the two versions look virtually identical. The textures, models, and effects are all shared between them. The Pro version is simply designed to better support 4K TVs. Now, if we get back to the presentation as a whole, there are some great visuals on display. Characters are rendered with great detail this time, featuring rounded edges, sharp texture work, and very expressive facial animation. In a controversial move, DQ11 lacks voice acting entirely. For a classic RPG, it actually works rather well, but some users might be surprised and disappointed. The big question here is whether or not this will change when the game is released in the West. After all, the Japanese version of DragonQuest8 lacks voice acting entirely, but the Western version introduced both full voice acting and an enhanced soundtrack. Looking at the game world as a whole then, the areas on display are reasonably detailed and manage to bring the artwork to life. Texture work is intricate, often with parallax occlusion maps being used in some areas. Cities are rich with nicely crafted buildings, many of which you can enter, and it's possible to kind of jump around on top of many of them as well for fun. Out in the overworld then, we see massive vistas with flowing grass, alongside rather dense forests. The game uses a nice time of day system as well, with shadows that respond to the sun and moonlight. On top of that, light sources actually cast shadows, so as you walk around a dungeon holding a torch, you'll see nice long shadows cast from objects and scenery around the player. It looks great. One downside here is the prevalence of pop-in in certain scenes. It's not overly severe, mind you, but you'll definitely spot blades of grass drawing in at a distance, which can sometimes prove a little distracting. Still, all of this is in service of frame rate, and DQ11 offers highly stable performance on both platforms across multiple fronts. So, first and foremost, there's the loading. DQ11 loads very quickly. Most areas are large enough on their own, but when you do encounter a loading screen, it doesn't require much waiting, which is great. The real key here, though, are the battles, which start and end just as fast as a cartridge-based game. Encounter a foe and you're whisked away to the battlefield, directly pulled from the area where you encountered the enemy. Blast through the battle and the game spits you right back out into the world without a hitch. It works really well. And the battles themselves look great too, with excellent animation and plenty of suitable effects. You can even choose between two different camera modes, an automatic mode which uses cinematic angles, or a full manual mode that even allows you to run around the battlefield between turns. And all of this comes at a rock solid 30 frames per second. The last couple decades of Dragon Quest games have typically aimed for this level of performance, so it's really no great surprise that the development team opted for 30 frames per second again. What is great here, however, is just how stable it is on both platforms. There are no frame pacing issues here, the frame rate holds completely steady, and the game simply never stutters. It's as stable as you could want. We're looking at the PS4 Pro first here, by the way, and you can see that it really does hold up nicely. Now that may not seem like a huge feat, mind you, but reaching this level of consistency can still be a serious challenge even when the target is just 30 frames per second. As a result, the technology basically gets out of the way and allows the game to play out without ever feeling constrained. Which means no matter how quickly you move through the world, the game always manages to hit its performance target. And the same is true over on the base PS4 system. You get the same consistent frame rate without any dips or stutters. So while Dragon Quest XI may not be a technical marvel of sorts, you still get a nice stable game that successfully executes the thing it sets out to deliver. The big question for us then going forward is how well DQ11 can translate to the Nintendo Switch. That's right, while the game is currently available on 3DS and PlayStation 4, a Switch version has also been announced. Now, developers using Unreal Engine 4 have achieved some pretty nice results on Nintendo's system, but this always comes with some compromises. If you look at something like Snake Pass, for instance, we got 864p on the base PlayStation 4 at 30 frames per second. Over on Switch, though, the resolution was dropped below 720p in docked mode, while the frame rate was a tad less stable overall. It's still a great version of the game, but it leaves us to wonder what the resolution and performance targets on Switch will be. I guess we'll find out soon enough. But for now, that's Dragon Quest XI then. It's a great looking JRPG that demonstrates the flexibility of the Unreal Engine 4 and the talent of its development studio. It doesn't raise the visual bar or anything, but it does present an attractive world devoid of technical problems. Couple that with super fast loading, and it's a great experience all around. Currently, Dragon Quest XI is scheduled for release in the West next year. We'll be curious to see what changes and improvements, if any, are brought to the table. But until then, at least know that the final Japanese release is in great shape, so those looking forward to the game next year can be just as hyped as they want without worrying about any technical problems coming up. Anyways, that's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on Twitter as always. And until next time, this is John signing off.